Okay. All right, chat room, you should hear some voices and see some faces. What's going on in there? Let's say hi in the text. Okay. I think we're ready to go. Let's do this thing. Let's blow everybody's mind with transparent MMO building. Okay. I think we're good. Oh, and that the one thing that has changed since I've had you guys on was, as you can tell, my camera is what the audience sees. So me in a square, Greg talking by himself, you guys when we're all four up, that kind of stuff. And when I show screen grabs or video, you'll see those. So the idea is that in the Zoom, my video can act as kind of what the eyeballs are seeing, and it might help better inform, what I'm showing while you're talking, that kind of thing. So use it as needed if it's needed at all. Okay. There's the chat. All right, we are on our way. Let's see. It's good to see you, Mika. I always have Mika in the chat. That always makes me happy. And Tweep. Always good to see Tweep and Cole. You guys are great for showing up every time. We appreciate it. All right, here we go then, folks. The time is now. If not now, then when? And if not us, then who? Right? That's what I always say. Let's see. Oh, we need intro music. Let's do that. All righty, here we go. Recording is started. We have video, and it starts in 3, 2, 1. Whoops, here we go. No, that's quiet. Let's turn that up. All right, 3, 2, 1.
Fantastic Pixel Castle and Frog Pants Studios presents Word on the Street with Greg Street and Scott Johnson.
Welcome to another edition of Word on the Street. I'm Scott Johnson, and that is the aforementioned Greg Street. Greg, welcome back.
Hey, Scott. How are you?
Feels weird that a whole month has passed. I feel like I just talked to you, man.
No, right?
I don't like it.
I guess that's a good thing.
It is a good thing. It's all right. Time's moving quick. Production on Ghost is moving quick. I don't know if that's true. I'm just saying that.
No, it's true. It's true. It's going great.
Yeah, you kind of said, you indicated last time that you guys felt like you were maybe not super ahead of the game, but you're further than you thought you would be maybe at this point. You think there's a chance that at some point you'll hit like a ding desert and things will slow considerably, or do you think you're going to be able to keep this pace up?
Oh, 100%. We'll hit bumps in the road.
Yeah.
The play testing we did in the last few months was really focusing for us. Like the whole team kind of came together. It was really clear to everyone what we needed to work on, and it worked. Like technically it worked. We were really happy. We got all the design in place, but we're going to hit problems. We're going to be like, oh crap, we didn't, we thought our reward system was going to work better than it is. How are we going to fix it? I mean, it's game development. So that's going to happen.
Sure. Well, speaking of which, talk about this play test. You also put out a big video, sort of end of year look at how things are going, some actual gameplay in your pre-alpha play. And I'm excited to announce that we have back two favorites to the show. Christina back, VP of Product. Good to see you, Christina. How are you?
I'm great. Happy to be here again.
Glad to have you. Shanti, VP of Creative, back as well. It's good to see you, man.
Hi. I see you again.
Great to have you both. We got some questions that you guys are going to be uniquely qualified to answer. Of course, Greg's going to have all sorts of thoughts as well, but we've got a lot to talk about because, as I mentioned before, you put out this December video, which was, a chance to hear from Greg's mouth what's going on in the game so far. You showed some early gameplay. Explained in the video, as we should probably explain again, that some of the stuff you see in that video is placeholder content from either Unreal or otherwise that you're using to kind of get things started, and then mixed with some stuff that's a little bit more curated by your artists and your animators and stuff so far. You talked a lot about the Ghost Core loop, get a little bit more into what blue zones are versus red zones, what the city hubs are like, all very exciting stuff. And so today we get to dive just a bit deeper, and a lot of this is your questions out there, what you guys have been asking about this thing. So pretty exciting to get right into these, and I'll just dive right in. So let's do this. Before we get far, though, this is something we didn't do before when you guys were on before, and I'll start with Christina. you guys obviously, hard at work on Ghost and have been, in and around the industry for a while, but we've never really talked about how you guys play MMOs or your history with MMOs. Christina, tell me about, apparently there's some stories about you playing Deep into the Night or something like that. I'll let you explain, but you're a big MMO fan at your core.
Yes, certainly much of my life was devoted to playing World of Warcraft, especially in grad school, which was slightly dangerous. But I played back in Burning Crusade and was in a guild, eventually inherited the guild as you do, right? Some of my most fun memories were trying to teach. My guild was not like a raiding guild, but I raided with another guild and trying to teach non-raiders how to raid. Super fun. Always chaos, which I love. And then besides WoW, once WoW taught me I love the genre, then I kind of played every other big name in the genre, left WoW for a moment to go play ESO, played Final Fantasy 14, Guild Wars 1 and 2, Wildstar, if you remember that.
Oh, yeah.
I love the genre because it's all about exploring worlds and learning about characters, telling stories in this big, expansive way. So yeah, that I've spent many hours playing WoW and other MMOs, and often, yes, late into the night because I'm nocturnal, so
I have a similar problem with MMOs. I need to try all of the new ones that come out. I need to see what people are doing, partly because I just like the different emphases, if that's a word. I think it is. But going to ESO, for example, is a great way to see what kind of a hardcore focus on story and voiceover and character is compared to, say, a more mechanically complex game and something like, I don't know, maybe Final Fantasy 14 might be a good example of that, or even WoW. And that's always an interesting juxtaposition, but also I love these worlds. So this must be fantastic for you. You guys are all part of building this brand new one based on nobody's IP but your own. I mean, it must be exciting as a player like you.
For sure. It's absolutely a dream. And it's also, a very hard genre to deal with and build in. So I think that's balances out your dream with, this is kind of intimidating. But I am very lucky to be able to have this opportunity.
Well, it's great to hear more about it. Shanti, how about you? Where do you come from on this?
Oh boy, many years of play wasted on MMOs, joyfully wasted. I mean, all the way back, I remember reading about EverQuest in PC Gamer magazine before it launched. Played plenty of smaller MMOs, I would say, like Star Trek Online, even Star Wars: The Old Republic, some of those wonderful games. I think World of Warcraft is probably the one I spent the most hours in. I love both this expansiveness of the world, the immersion of the world, but I also love grinding my brains out. So I was, going for those achievements in the raids, getting Keystone Master ahead of the curve, chasing some, different colors of parses. I won't say which because I don't want to embarrass myself, but getting a taste of that kind of hardcore side of MMOs definitely near and dear to my heart.
Well, Greg, you seem to have attracted a lot of hardcores on the team. Was that intentional on your part?
I mean, yeah, we're making an MMO for players who love MMOs. So we want to get people that understand the genre and appreciate it, and are excited to play the game. It's always hard in this business when you get someone who's like, "Hey, man, I just want to make art, and I don't really play these games," because they're going to struggle to know how to make the right art for the genre we're making.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's fascinating to watch this. Of course, that's the whole point of the show, and we're going to get right into it today. Based on what we got to see a little bit of in your December video, and I'm so excited that you guys are doing those because just, it's one thing to have this podcast and we do some stuff visually, but a lot of people are just listening to it. But to get the occasional sort of visual look at the art and even just the early concept stuff and some of this gameplay is so exciting for me as a player, and I know a lot of people listening to this agree with that. One of the big takeaways is Ghost looks like a sort of a lobby hub-based multiplayer game right now instead of an MMO. Some people have been saying, well, yeah, we just all meeting up in the town and then we're off doing our stuff. Is this closer to a looter shooter than it is an MMO? And I think it's an interesting question. why do you? What would you say to that question? First of all, and second of all, are there elements of that in this game? And where give us the bigger picture of what this MMO is based on what we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, what we showed in the video was a lobby. Well, there's nothing in our town yet except people group up and then go off on adventures and they kind of come back together. Mm-hmm. Even the red zone at the end with the boss fight, like if you listen to the voiceover, I kind of described them as more traditional MMO zones. But what we showed was a boss fight. So it was also easy then, I think, for people to say, well, that is also instance. So everything in this game is instance, mm-hmm. which is not the goal. Like the goal of the game is to combine instances you could go on with your friends, which, by the way, dungeons exist in most MMOs, with the kind of open world part where you will see lots of players doing different things. You can group up with them or not. You can coordinate with them or not. And we just haven't built that part yet because we feel like we have, not that it's easy to do, but we at least have some examples of how that works in contemporary games versus like the blue zones, which are kind of a pretty new thing. So it was really where we wanted to focus.
Right. And the concept is, I guess this should be mentioned, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but even though you may have exact designs on where you expect things to be at launch and perhaps beyond, nothing's perfectly set in stone in game development. There may be ideas that come down the road later that you want to implement or change or whatever. So what people see now should just not be taken as anything more than this is the stage we're in now, right? I know you guys kind of go to great pains to explain that, yes, this is pre-alpha. Do not think this is the final game. We're using a lot of stand-in assets. The little spawn closets are amazing, but a necessity at this stage. I'm not sure why. Sometimes I think it's hard for gamers to get out of the headspace of I want to see the final thing, and instead see this early stuff, which I guess is why this is kind of a pioneering thing you guys are doing. But
it's funny, because overall, I think players really gave us a pass on the art. We said this isn't our art. And no one was like, your art looks terrible, like except in jest. But on the gameplay, I think more people were like, oh, is that the actual game? And like, well, no, the gameplay is just as far along as the art is, meaning there are parts of it that are representative and parts of it that are totally stand-in. Like, we are not going to have portals that you jump through and you see a loading bar as you go. Like, that's where we are today after a year of development. We certainly won't ship like that.
Well, as you mentioned, sometimes it feels like red zones are a little bit just instanced dungeons. Raids, party experiences. Can you tell us more about how these larger zones will work, or more about them in general?
They were really inspired by endgame zones. Most World of Warcraft players have very fond memories of like the Timeless Isle in Mists of Pandaria, mm-hmm. but Blizzard has done other ones since then where it's not a level up zone that you kind of go through and do all the quests and then you never ever go back, except maybe there's a holiday event or you're leveling an alt. But we're trying to make zones you will want to go back to from time to time. And part of the reason is because there are dynamic events. The things change. It's not just daily quests, but some objectives are there some days and they're not there other days. Bosses spawn some days and aren't there other days. You'll need resources and rewards that you want to go to these zones. And there'll be pretty big zones I don't know if we'll literally have 100 players running around, but that should be the feeling that you see a lot of other players. Mm-hmm. And these are not opportunities to kind of go off into your corner and do your own thing. Like if you really want to play without a lot of other players around, well, blue zones are perfect for that. So when you're in a red zone, it should be about interacting with lots of other players.
It might be a question we save for when we have some of the technical leads on the show again, but are there efforts being made to improve the experience of being in a main city or a hub and feeling like it's populated? One of the big criticisms about World of Warcraft was when they started adding instanced experiences everywhere. So you could be in the same city with your friend and not see them because maybe you're at a different quest level than they are or a different stage of a story or whatever. I guess, have you guys talked about that at all? Just the sense of big and full and everyone's here and it's a real city kind of stuff.
Yeah. We have talked a lot about that because we do want the city to feel populated. Mm-hmm. Warcraft is trying to solve that with their pre-existing design architecture of there are servers. Like when you log in, you pick, I'm going to Illidan or I'm going to Bronzebeard or Blackhand or whatever. and that's your server. And then within that, they sometimes do layers when there's too many people in one location. So you may be on the same server with your friend, but you can't see them, if they're standing right in front of you. So we don't have servers. On the same token, like, let's say we're fortunate we have 3 million players. Like, we can't show 3 million players in the city. Like, everyone's,
right.
Graphic card would melt and the servers would go down. So we do need some way to partition off. But that should be largely transparent to players. Like, your friends, you should show up. We like the idea that, oh yeah, that guy's always sitting in front of the bank. I see that player there all the time. We want that sense of community in the city. And honestly, part of the reason we decided to build just one city is to make sure we can focus players in that area versus them being scattered off in, like, Thunder Bluff or whatever, and there's only 5 people running around.
That's the funky.
We're having
go ahead.
Having
Shanta,
cities that are just dead because no one goes there anymore because we're 4 expansions past.
Right.
Yeah. We also when we were thinking about how we're designing quests and quest architecture, we want to avoid that really painful moment where your friend is one step ahead of you in the quest, so they see the town on fire, but you just see the town unburned, and then we can't really play together. And there's just a lot of complexity there that we're kind of sidestepping in how we're designing our quests to begin with.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good thing to be mindful of, just given, like, there's such a trade-off there, because on the one hand, I like to enter a big city and feel like it's populated and busy, which means active players and it's exciting, the game's at a great place or whatever. But when you go into a place that's heavily instanced and you're only seeing like 2 or 3 other dudes walking around, there's a tendency on the player side, I think, to go, oh, where is everybody? Is this a dead game? That kind of mentality or whatever starts to leak in. So I've always been, curious what that balance is. I'm not sure even WoW has found that balance yet. I think it's still, they definitely do better at it than when they first started adding that stuff. But, and they're not crashing servers like the Encourage days either. So obviously they found the other better place to be. But it'll be interesting to see what you guys do moving forward on that front. Let's talk about world bosses for a second, Greg. They are a favorite thing in MMOs. I love a good world boss. Should loot drops be personal in those cases where you got 25, 30, 50 of you fighting, or should they come from some sort of shared pool where everybody must roll for a handful of items? What's the philosophy on that kind of loot in the world?
I mean, we'll see. It's gnarly. Overall, I'm not a fan of personal loot. I think it kind of, yes, it's fair, but I think it takes you out of the experience of, like, the other players are there, and even the fiction that, like, the dragon died and dropped the helmet rather than the dragon died and dropped 5 helmets and those randomly went to 5 people. I think it's a little too abstract from the idea that I'm looting a corpse of something I just killed.
Does that mean you got to do lots more loot then to solve that? Or, like, what do you think the balance is there?
Yeah, you probably do. I mean, even with personal loot, it drops a lot of loot. I like the rolling aspect, and probably for, like, groups of friends, we'll do a master looter things. I know that's important to the social fabric of a lot of those guilds.
Yeah, I think our guild would like that. In fact, we kind of do that now. But there
may be some cases where we really want to do personal loot, like a quest item that everyone needs or something like that. But overall, I think the experience is more fun when the helmet drop that you really want, and you got to roll against another player. There's this tendency of players to kind of, like, they focus so much on efficiency, and it's more efficient if you don't have to interact with other players to get your loot, and the game just kind of pushes the loot to you. But I just think it's one of those things that chips away at the notion that those are other players, they're real human beings, and they can just kind of start to feel like bots or something.
So are there going to be other overworld-like experiences similar to that you're planning?
Oh yeah, I mean, the whole point of the red zones is that we can do, like, pretty big, epic experiences. Like, I don't know that it will be Gates of Encourage level every time, and that had a bunch of gameplay and server performance problems, but we like that epic sense. Like, when you're in a red zone, it should feel epic. It should feel like the challenges that I need to do here benefit from having lots of other players around.
So, Christina, why are we not seeing those yet? Why haven't those been built yet?
Yeah, it's
because we're lazy.
Yeah, that's not the answer. No, in prototype, really what you're focused on is the areas of the game that are very uncertain. Like, we need to build it to figure out, like, what this even is. And clearly blue zones are kind of the most innovative unknown part of the game. And so you focus on blue zones as, like, let's understand, like, how do blue zones even work? Like, do MMO players even like these? Was a big part of our like prototype goals. And so to do that, we basically built the blue zones in depth and then kind of pasted on other parts of an MMO that were like players who play a lot of MMOs will be able to squint and see, oh, that's how a raid would connect to this. Oh, that's how the city would connect to this. But all the beautiful, like in between, like the story that ties it all together and all of that, that is our next step to build. That's not where you want to focus in prototype because you don't have that much time and you don't have a big team. So we have a very small team that has to focus pretty tightly on proving out the innovations. Before we scale the team, we want to know that blue zones are worth investing in. And so we feel like we have proven that out in our prototype phase. And now we can shift to putting in the rest of the MMO that kind of will make the whole experience sing together.
Yeah. We've talked on the show a lot about core systems and core, sort of the core loop being as ready as possible before you have to start adding all this other stuff on. Even though I think obviously you guys have a wealth of experience and have done this a bunch of other times, it still sounds so complicated to me. Like, it's one thing to say, well, it was fun for us to run down this hill and kill this dragon, but now we got to make all of that work in a vast way across a giant bunch of space and a bunch of random space that is kind of unique to the genre that we're introducing in this particular MMO with the zones and stuff. Like, I just don't know how you guys do it. I'm impressed by it every time we talk about it because I know you're going to get there, but I don't know how you're doing it. So I guess that's part of why we have the show.
One step at a time.
Yeah. Yeah, one little step at a time. Sorry, Greg, you were going to say something. I mean to.
Well, I just said it's hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not,
Yeah, worth it though. Always hard.
Yeah.
Hard things are worth it. What thoughts, Christine, I'll stay with you for a second. What thoughts do you have around guilds or player-managed communities in the game at this stage anyway, especially with how blue shards are more oriented to smaller groups?
Yeah, so we really care about the social fabric of MMOs. And I think in many ways, I can see guilds being super important in Ghost because like maybe, you want to like go build out or go explore a blue zone together. Maybe you do want to build out a blue zone together, similar to like, okay, this is your guild shard. But I think really MMOs, when you think about establishing the like core social experience, finding friends that you like to play that experience with over and over again, well, that's your guild. And they're important to making sure that you always have someone to play with. You understand like what their goals are that kind of match your goals, maybe. So a lot of what we want to do is help structure these social experiences in a way where players are rewarded a bit more for investing in them. I think often in WoW, I said I inherited a guild, and that's actually like that happens a lot. I think leading a guild, organizing raids, these take a tremendous amount of effort from players who don't get any extra reward for it. And so I think there are ways that we could explore how do we reward those people who are investing in building Ghost social community layer. How do we help them feel like all of that effort is worth it?
Right.
And of course, they are rewarded intrinsically from that right now, but we think we can do a little bit more on the game side to recognize all of that effort that they put into helping us.
Nice. So I just wanted to ask you and Shanti this. You guys are having fun, right? Like you're having a blast in these play tests? It's important to ask, right? Because you MMO addicts, if you're not having a good time in an MMO, people should worry. But from what I've heard, it sounds like everybody's having a pretty good time.
People are having fun, and we are having fun as developers. It's actually one of the pillars of our company is have fun along the way. We laugh a lot, troll each other, we jump off cliffs, we find crazy bugs to exploit every day that we play test. And it's a great litmus test because if we're laughing, we're having fun, we're telling stories after we have an evening trying out a new feature, then once that's polished and in an actual game, players are probably going to feel that same way too. So
Sure.
This is part of the concept of eating your dog food you'll hear in industry, right? Of, get in there, play test constantly, learn from that signal.
Sure. And speaking of which, Christina, I guess I would ask you, are you confident in where those stories are going to be the most dynamic? That is to say, blue zones. Are you pretty happy with where that's at right now?
I've been very impressed by players' creativity in taking a problem in a blue zone and attacking it from multiple ways. we often will get some feedback that's like, oh, do you guys know you can actually like cheat a little bit and use the glider this way, or go around this problem this way? And maybe we didn't know it, but we love it. And it's not something that we want to remove. We want players to creatively solve problems in the game. And the fact that it's happening even this early, I think is very promising for us, is that there will be a lot of kind of fun ways for players to take a blue zone and attack it the way they want to.
Shanti, I would ask you, it's kind of a related question. We're talking about, guilds and social groups, friend groups, adventure groups, whatever we want to call them. At this point, I guess, what are your thoughts about that in general, and how Ghost is approaching the social aspects of the game with blue zones, with, big city content, that sort of stuff? Just kind of give us a general overall how you're feeling about all that stuff.
Obviously it's early, so we haven't built a lot of those features yet, but what we have built and the direction that we're going, I'm feeling really good about. Most of the players that we talk to, or even when we talk to each other, when we ask about their favorite MMO memories, it almost always involves other players in some way. And that's really powerful, right? To have that social connection, to have that shared experience. And so kind of from the ground up, both in the core loop that we're building, but also even the IP that we're building, we really want to preserve that and almost double down on it. So even the structure of how the pieces of land float in the sky and how you go there, a lot of that will be kind of a shared experience that is going to make it way more fun. And yes, we'll have solo players, but a lot of it is going to be building those memories together for that next play session, that next month, that next year.
And connected to that, the cohesive story of the overall arc and lore.
Right.
It seems like a bit of a challenge to make sure these shards, these blue zones, these experiences feed well into the overarching story of everything. I assume that's a specific kind of challenge. And how is that going?
It's going well, and it's incredibly fun and challenging. You're right. MMO story in general, I think, is a challenging beast to tackle. The way that we're approaching it is with a lot of planning. So we have been working on, and actually have the first version of, a 10-year story that we hope will span when we launch the game to when we're kind of done with the major arc for our world. So even though the world is shattered and floating out there, the story is actually extremely cohesive in terms of the themes of tying it together and healing the world and exploring what we're calling the drift, which is the kind of the vast expanse of shards that you can see and go to. Our story is very character driven, right? Both in terms of how the player character is interacting with the world, but also the star NPCs, we call them, that you meet along the way. And we really want to have this sense of this vibrant, progressing story that keeps people coming back every year.
It just seems difficult to make sure that the cohesion is there, given the randomness. Not the randomness, it's not the right word. It's not like these are just RNG.
No, I get what you're
zones,
saying.
you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
And this is why, like, we're going to have slightly different story experiences based on the type of content you're playing. So if you're on a red zone, which is the more traditional MMO zone, it's going to feel like more of a linear MMO quest line, right? You'll have the dragon swoops in and the characters need your help, and you go off and do something epic and heroic and fun with other players. When you're on blue zones, you can think of it as a little bit less structured story. Things that may not be part of the main quest per se, but more organic, more environmental storytelling. So you find things out in the world that teach you more about the universe, its history, the enemies. For some of the Blue Zone content, we were looking at games like Elden Ring for how they kind of gradually show you the world in really natural ways. This is masterfully done, and we can learn a lot from that.
Yeah, I love the way that works in that game. That's a good thing to use. Can you elaborate a little bit on, I don't know, the core loop panel? Like Undercity, there's a mention of faction bases. Kind of elaborate on how the faction stuff works, at least at this stage. I know it's early, but how that
definitely, yeah. So one of the early things we built into our city was this concept of different groups that have different ideologies and different beliefs for where the city and the drift and all of the people that inhabit it, the directions that they should go. We found that like natural tension between these groups it's a great storytelling mechanism, and it lets us build classes that harken back to these core these core fantasies that we find in other games, other MMOs that a lot of us want to play in our game, right? So with these will never restrict who you get to play with, right? It's not like the old Horde versus Alliance and WoW, where like, oh, I can't play with you tonight because we're on other factions. You can play with your friends no matter what faction or class that you're playing. But when you go to the city, which we're calling Haven, when you're exploring Haven, you'll find these different districts that are kind of owned and overseen by the different factions, and they'll all have their own star NPCs, their own quest lines, their own stories, their own gear, their own aesthetics, and their own fantasies attached to it.
We're looking at a little Haven concept art here on the live stream. If you're listening via audio only, I do recommend checking out the YouTube archive on all this, because you're going to get to see some video. We've already showed a few clips of that, but this city alone is really inspiring to me. It's maybe the first time I've seen some concept art from you guys where I was able to connect stuff Greg has said about these floating shards and islands, but having that somehow still kind of be grounded in, hey, here's a major city with all the hubs and all the stuff you would do there. And it fits somehow. I mean, this is really illustrative of what that looks like. Yeah. Go ahead, Greg. I'm sorry. I cut you off.
I said awesome. I mean, that's the goal, is we want it, even though the world we're making is islands, we want it to feel like a coherent universe. We want you to feel like I could go travel to that particular shard that I see there, the same way you might see an island on the horizon you want to get to. We don't want a game that's just lobby based and then it kind of spits you out into some pocket universe that doesn't really exist.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I'm a huge visual thinker anyway, so when I see this sort of stuff, I just get excited. It's really great.
It's funny. One of the things that I'd really encourage the art team to make is a map of the drift itself, even though we don't know what to call certain parts of the drift yet, just showing that like it's a place and the regions have names and you can kind of find where on the map the city is. I think just it helps someone who thinks like I do orient myself to where I am in the game.
Shanti, I was going to ask you this question about some of the lore. Can you tell us any details? Like, for example, what do the people eat in the Witchwoods? Spelled W-I-C-H, by the way. I love the spelling. For example, I mean, we're just sort of really interested in the world as a potential player base. And is there anything you can give us about any of those specifics, like fun little specific things in the game yet?
We're definitely going to be talking more about the universe and the story and the world in 2025. So I can't give away too much yet. One of the reasons that we're building a really deep and intricate mystery that kind of weaves itself into the fabric of our world, which means that if we just talk about it, then the mystery will be spoiled and then it will be way less fun to play. What I will say is that one of the things that we invested in a lot very early, like essentially when the company was started, was the world building, right? We have incredible artists and writers, both internally and externally, that have invested at this point probably hundreds of hours into building out the backstory and the history, way more than we could ever share. And that's not going to be an exposition dump when you go and log in the game that you have to read through 150 pages before you can start the game. But we want players to feel it and know kind of in their bones that all of this is back there and will be unveiled gradually over time as the player and the people of the world both discover the truths of everything that happened in the past and how it's going to affect the future.
All right. Well, I want to show off some artwork from some class art concept stuff. And I'm showing that now, and I'm curious if you have some thoughts. You can just sort of tell us about the art style, what you're going for. Is it cohesing for everybody? Are you happy with where it is? I mean, personally, I'm thrilled with this style. I think this looks awesome.
Yeah, so this is 2D art from a wonderful vendor called Envar. This is obviously early explorations. What we're showing with some of these is what we're exploring and seeing if it works is putting the different classes from different factions, each of which kind of has their own distinct identity, putting them next to each other and seeing how it works. So obviously none of this is in 3D yet, and I wouldn't even say this is even in our art style necessarily. Mm-hmm. It's in the general range. Mm-hmm. The direction that we're going with this style is what we're calling handcrafted heroic realism. So we want it to have this kind of painterly, handcrafted look. We want it to feel like you're a badass hero that could go out into the drift and fight giant monsters and survive and do heroic things. But we wanted to have a grounded sense of realism. So when we look at something like a Fortnite, for example, it's very, very cartoony, very, very stylized towards that end of the spectrum, too far for what we want. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have like a hyper realistic Unreal 5 game where you can see the nose hairs on every character. And that's not only not scalable for something like an MMO, but necessarily doesn't age as well.
Right. Yeah.
So we're going to have something that's much more timeless in terms of a look.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about that, I guess, stylization and, what are the limits of that before it becomes a cartoon versus,
yes,
I still think the smartest thing World of Warcraft ever did was to decide to go with something stylized that you could evolve pretty easily as technology improved, and you didn't have to, you basically, at the time, if you were going to go for state-of-the-art realism, you were going to have stuff that looked like plastic mannequins about 4 years later. And their decision to do that, I think, was a really smart one. So it seems like you guys are going down a similar path, which I think is
and
good.
ultimately all of this needs to be realized in 3D in our game and gameplay, which we have increasingly behind the scenes, and next year is really when we're honing in on what our distinct answer looks like. We've also been hiring some amazing artists internally that are really helping us articulate this. Like we finally have our first animator, we're hiring our first VFX person. So if you're an artist and this sort of challenge of designing a new art style for a game like an MMO intrigues you, please look at our jobs page.
Well, you've got some concept art here called Ash Hands Faction Concepts. I absolutely love the name of this. So we're looking at kind of a gunslinger class here, and maybe we could talk a little bit more about its direction. This might give people an idea of where you land on the fantasy to sci-fi scale, because, we've got some guns here. One of them's a pretty gnarly looking Gatling gun. I assume there's some thinking behind this, so tell us more.
Definitely. So philosophically, one of the things that you want to do in the prototype stage of development, so really, really early, is push the boundaries of your IP. So we say, how much sci-fi is too much sci-fi? And we do some art, we do some narrative, we do some explorations, and we see what feels right for our game. Guns is a great example. Some fantasy games just say no guns at all, right? This is like a low fantasy world. Maybe The Witcher is a great example of that. But we like to have some of that level of technology. I'm not talking about like an AK-47 factory where everyone's holding a machine gun, right? Like these are bespoke and magical things that you can find only a few classes even know how to use, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of guns though in these games, so you're speaking my language. I know there's some people who are like, keep your gunpowder out of my mana or whatever, but I tend to lean your direction, so I get it.
And to your example, the Gatling gun is an area where we're like, ooh, maybe this is too far, right? And maybe this is pushing it out of our comfort zone. It's not feeling fantasy enough. So all of this is us refining it.
Sure.
And it would be like a magical Gatling gun, not like a Gatling gun you go to the general store and buy. Like this is a special weapon, the same way your knight dude might have a magic sword.
Right. Yeah. It can't be. I totally get what you're saying. Like you're trying to make these iconic feeling, right? You want these not to just feel like everybody can have one of these.
Exactly.
You can have one of these because you earned it, and you're
special. You're a hero. You know how to use this.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that kind of stuff.
And that's where factions actually come in. And so I'll spend the next hour of this podcast just talking about factions. So everyone get ready. So when we say Ash Hands are a faction in the city.
Oh, cool.
And Ash Hands have this unique power, which I will not spoil where it comes from, where their hands turn ashen, hence the name, and they have access to this magical power of like heat from the forge, right? So when they draw their katanas, their blades are glowing with heat. When they're shooting their pistol, the revolver, it's magical bullets coming out of it that are white hot. And within that faction, there's different classes to choose from. So temp name, but it's called Gunsmoke Ronin, right? It's a revolver and katana wielding class, and so their move sets reflect that fantasy that you can see in some other IPs out there. but the Ash Hands themselves are this mix of kind of Japanese Ronin, Wild West gunslinger meld that's has a kind of unique place within our IP.
Yeah,
we're really happy with this direction, and think this may appeal to a lot of players.
I mean, my favorite combination is Western and like Shogun type stuff, and this
Right.
really captures that. So I'm stoked about that. A little bit of ninja with this lady here with the warp,
Exactly.
with the rope. Oh man,
Exactly.
Getting
It's obviously
excited.
early explorations, but a direction that so far we've gotten really good feedback on.
I agree. So, Christina, I got a
Remember, we want lots of classes in the game, so it's okay if some of them are a little like specific, because we want to launch with like 30 classes or something like that. So we can't go so broad as to say this is the martial artist or this is the sword user. We're gonna have to like be more refined than that.
It's still such an ambitious number. I can't think of any other MMO that started with 30. I'm sure there's something, but that's so ambitious. Like, do you ever question your choice to start with so many? Or, I mean, I guess you can adjust as you
ask me all the time, like, okay, Greg, when are you going to get realistic about this and cut the number down? But we are inspired a lot by, I mean, all three of us worked on League of Legends, and League of Legends has a lot of characters, and they make it work. And we're not going, to 100 right away, but we think there's somewhere in between having fewer classes with tons and tons of abilities and like lots of classes with only 4 abilities.
So, Greg, can I adopt or capture or keep that little cat guy that I've been seeing? Like, a lot of people are asking about pets in the game. Are there going to be pets?
Yes. There's a lot of different ways to do pets. There is the like, I'm a class, and part of my class kit is I have a pet that helps me out, and that's actually what you're seeing more in that image.
Mm-hmm.
There are also, I literally want a house pet that, I want a house cat that lives in my house, or things like that. Like, we will probably also do that. It's just a different system then, and you have to decide, is it about going out and collecting 100 cats in my house, or is that,
Yeah.
is that a little weird? And maybe instead you have like your smaller number of pets. Like, that's just the kind of thing we have to explore, but we understand the player desire to have pets, same reason humans like pets.
Yeah, it sounds like, and I hear a rumor that you got a designer working on a pet system right now. So, it sounds like at the very least you're aware of the desire for the community to have pets, but whether or not you guys go completely nuts with it, I guess is still on the table. We'll find out, pet lovers. You're just going to have to wait like the rest of us.
When I look at all our art for creatures and concepts of little critters in the game, like, oh, I want to collect all of them. So, that's definitely something the team is interested in. But like, when do you build something like that? I think is the question that we're facing, because we do want to, get Ghost in players' hands as soon as possible. And so that's one of the questions of like, will it be in their hands and have a pet collecting system at the initial moment? I hope so, but it's hard to know until we go through the next phase of production, which is pre-production, and figure out, okay, exactly how long will this game take to build, right?
Sure. Yeah, and stuff sometimes get cut to make that happen. I mean, even though we're really far from release at this point, or whatever the term really far means, but a lot of people asking about where this game's going to show up. And, we've talked a bunch about where PC players are going to be playing it, and that would be, of course, on the PC. But at this stage, Christina, can you say with any assurity that consoles are maybe in the mix, that sort of thing down the road?
I can say that is where we want to go. I think it's again a question of like, when do we go on consoles? You see some games that launch on PC and console simultaneously. You see other games that do PC first, kind of learn some hard lessons there, and then should run console. One of our goals that we really want to support is playing with your friends. If you couldn't tell from all the other design things like Blue Zones and making it really shine when you're playing with the people that you have fun playing with. So for us, that means we want to make sure that if your friend's on Xbox and you're on PC, you can play with them. But we are less interested in other platforms, I think, where the game would have to take serious changes to get onto that platform, right? So
Sure.
Mobile is an example where like maybe one day, but we're not even thinking about that right now.
Yeah, I notice what most MMO studios end up doing there anyway is some kind of other version of the game on mobile. You rarely see them try to to mimic or at the very least try to cross-play or cross-save something like that. And I used to, at first I remember when mobile was happening early on, and I was like, wouldn't it be cool if I could take all my WoW progress in a mobile version of the game, even if it didn't play as well? It was just like, take it on the road. And I guess that's true of, Steam Decks and things now. But yeah, if you really think about it, it's just such a different interface that's hard. That's a hard, tall thing that nobody's really quite mastered yet. So I guess we'll have to...
And there's a lot of technical limitations as well, right? File size matters a lot more on mobile than it does on a PC hard drive, for example.
Yeah.
That's a sticky one.
I think the Steam Deck is actually a great thing to bring up. One thing we've wanted to do is make sure that we are playing with controller as much as we were playing with keyboard, to make sure we can support both modes of input, because sometimes you just want to chill on your couch, and maybe that's not when you're doing your hardcore progression rating. Maybe that you want your keyboard and mouse for, but being able to play this on your Steam Deck when you're just chilling with friends, that sounds great too.
Yeah, and for some of us, I'll raise my hand and admit it, I really like it when I can sit on my office chair and chill with a controller sometimes. I don't know if it's just because I'm getting older, but my keyboard mouse hands are, getting a little cranky if I do stuff for too long. Too long of a play session of any game really starts to get to me. And sometimes it's nice to just sit back and, play Diablo 4 that way or whatever. So that's really good to hear from, I think, a certain faction of players who are already super into their controllers on their PCs anyway. So that's good to hear. Let's talk about this. Greg, is Ghost going to have a horizontal or vertical gear progression? I get asked a lot. What do you think of that?
I mean, yes, it'll have both. We think vertical gear progression is just core to the MMO experience. Like, you want to get more powerful. You want to see the numbers go up. You want to see that you can fight monsters that you couldn't fight before because you've become more powerful and you've got a better sword or whatever. But we want to do a lot of vertical stuff as well. It helps to give you things for completionists to do. It helps to kind of meet different player motivations than always just picking the best in slot item all the time. In fact, this has not been proven out in the software. It's just a design doc at this stage, but we are trying to have some gear that have, stats on it, like it has more agility or stamina and crit or whatever. And then we want to try some gear that don't have stats on it, that are more about player preference for, this makes me move a little faster, this makes me easier to heal or something like that. And then we would just lock it to character level rather than tying it to the stats as well. That solves the problem where you find the best healing item, and once you put it on, you never need to replace it again.
So this may sound like an 18-year-old question in the MMO world, but what is the team's hard or fast or perhaps loose opinion or stance on multi-boxing? I
mean, if I could make it go away, I would, because we think it's, the game's intended to be a social game. And if your group is your 4 other alts, that's not a social experience. You may be entertaining yourself. You may have a different skill curve going on around how can I coordinate these, but you're not really interacting with other players the same way. Now, that said, I don't know that it's such a scourge that we need to devote tons and tons of resources to preventing it. Probably if people want a multi-box and it's not hurting anything, we won't care, and we'll only care if it starts to become the dominant way to play and eclipses people playing with other humans.
Yeah, I guess that all just comes with, I don't even know if you can test for most of that. You just have to see what people do, I guess, right? Before you find out what the exploits are that you didn't think were there, and you take care of them as they come, I suppose. How about the team stance on PvP? I know there's going to be PvP. You talked about it. You said there'll be PvP aspects, but what does that actually, do we have a definition of what that means for Ghost?
What we think is fun about PvP is, humans are unpredictable opponents, and there's usually a lot of skill involved in countering another human player that computers can't offer yet. What we don't want, and probably won't do, is very organized PvP, like something like arenas or esports. And we won't have a separate gear progression path of, I'm going to go collect all my PvP gear now. Instead, what you're more likely to see is some red zones have PvP enabled. You get additional rewards if you kill another player. And then A design that we're really excited to try is blue zones where two different groups go in together that are in competition, but rather than it just being a death match, they're competing to try to like complete the blue zone objectives first. And so you can just race against each other, or you can try to slow the other team down by like actually attacking them. We think that'll give it kind of more meaning than just the I sit in a bush and gank someone who comes by and giggle.
Do you think less structured is the way to go? In other words, like if you structure it so much where it's like there are leaderboards and there's a thing you got to queue into and it tells you who won after and all these stats are kept and your gear's based on it and all that. If you leave it more open, then the gameplay emerges maybe a little bit.
It's really like, again, I worked on League of Legends for years. I'm pretty familiar with what like very balanced, structured PvP looks like.
Yeah.
It's hard in MMO because as soon as you design 1v1 combat and now one person is fighting three people, like all the balance goes out the window. Or balancing things like how do you make a damage dealer and a healer compete when one character is just like healing themselves all the time and not doing a lot of damage to the other one. So a lot of structure really shines a very harsh light on class versus class balance, which is not designed in most MMOs for PvP. So we'd rather have it be more about PvP as a tool you have to accomplish things, but you're not going to see a lot of patch notes like the Gatling gun character now does 10 more damage against other players because that will balance them in PvP.
I see.
And I was going to say, like, the blue zone design also, I think, allows us to explore a lot, similar to what you said about exploits, or when I was talking about players are using things in weird and creative ways. I think we can try a bunch of different models of PvP on a blue zone and change up some of the rules of the blue zone, see what players do, see what's super fun, and then kind of lean in that direction. And that will allow us to, like, go with what's the most fun way to play and PvP in Ghost.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's really the way to do it. I don't envy the devs of teams that have to balance so much stuff, and that includes, the PvE aspects of the world are already very hard to balance. Like someone's way too powerful in their DPS versus other classes, so those classes don't get played as much, or people are min-maxing certain healers over others or whatever. Because that's out of balance. So you're always seeing those balances made. But then to have a whole separate system of having to keep people balanced on some kind of battlefield in PvP just sounds like a problem maybe I don't understand the depth of the player versus player community and how deep it goes and how broad it is. But it never seemed right to me. It never seemed like the right fit. And it's no knock against Blizzard. I think it's really interesting to see them try to do it and other games.
I think the battlegrounds in WoW were pretty good. I have mixed feelings about whether we should have introduced Arena. I think once we did Arena, then there was a lot of player expectation around any combination of 2 versus 2 or 3 versus 3 should be functional. And players kind of got grumpy when classes like priests and rogues always dominated PvP just by virtue of their abilities.
Sure. Oh, I know. Okay. Let's go back to zones for a minute, and let's go back out to the red zones. This is static created content where everybody's killing, big dragons together and whatnot, and going to the towns and whatever. Are these zones connected? In other words, am I going to be able to crest a hill or fly to a place pretty seamlessly, and I'm in another red zone, quote unquote red zone? Is that seamless to the player? Like, how are those connected?
We don't know yet. It's unlikely that we're going to make Kalimdor with like a bunch of red zones connected, because our whole fiction is that, we're not explaining this and we're not confirming it today, but like imagine there was a giant planet that blew up. And so now there's all these shards scattered around the sky and you kind of travel to them. Could we have 3 or 4 red shards that are stuck together? We've even talked about, could we have red shards that are like chained to the city that you could just walk into? Like we might do that. But overall, for players who like what they really, really need in their MMO is to crest the hill from one zone to see the next one, like that's not super critical for us to nail. And I would argue it doesn't even happen that much in live MMOs. Like you might do it once while leveling, and then you end up like flying or teleporting everywhere after that.
That's true. I think
Again, I'm not trying to dismiss people who are like, that's really what they love. That's the sense of immersion. Like I get it. We're just kind of going in a different direction for this game.
I also think if you swing back in a time machine to 2004 and walking into Silver Pine Forest is an amazing experience and feeling.
Yeah.
But I don't know in 2024 that's still like that novelty is sort of worn off a little bit. Like it's not that big a deal to me.
Yeah.
The environment I'm in is what matters most, and how I get there is kind of not important, as long as I'm not teleporting everywhere, which you've also addressed before in previous episodes.
Yeah.
But.
And WoW is like 8 continents at this point, right? I mean, you're not walking from Silver Pine Forest to Pandaria ever.
No, that never happens. Shanti, you were going to say?
What I do understand, because I have that same desire, is for an immersive world that feels huge and full of something to discover just around the next corner or over the next hill.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a feeling that we are absolutely pursuing. It just won't be in a unabridged 18-hour walking simulator from one side of the continent to another.
Yeah.
We think we can hit that feeling in an awesome, unique way without the traditional land mass, as it were.
Well, how large, Shanti, do you foresee the cities being? Like, are they multi-leveled, or are we going to have a lot of verticality, big castle-like structures, flat, small? Like, what's the scope, at least at this stage, creatively?
The city is big. The city is bigger than players will even be able to get to, right? You'll be able to look off and maybe see other shards in the distance that have towns on them, et cetera, et cetera. Right now we have upper areas, we have lower areas with stuff that's almost in the rock of the shard where the city is on. I'm trying to not spoil anything right now. It's really hard because we got a lot here. But when you're in the city, it will feel like a vibrant, lived-in place, both from the sense that you see player characters everywhere running around and standing on mailboxes and performing music, but also the NPCs will make it feel like it's lived in, right? You'll see bakers selling bread and moving between the different shops. You'll see city guards walking past, et cetera, et cetera. So it's good. The city itself will definitely feel big, and I think will potentially blow some expectations out of the water for what MMO cities can be.
All right. we got some time for a couple of quick questions from the community, from the chat. Here's one. Will Ghost have voice chat? Maybe only a party/guild VC. So built-in chat. I know we live in a world now where Discords and 100 other ways of communicating with our friends kind of change the landscape a little bit, but how important is it, and any of you can answer this, to have those kinds of built-in tools for chatting with your team? Greg, you want to start?
I mean, I don't know if Christina has an answer too. I would love to not have to build a voice chat. Like, is it entertaining for us as developers to make the world's cutting edge voice chat? No. Like when we play test in Ghost now, we use Discord. Like that seems like a perfectly fine solution. So maybe that's the way to go. I guess we'll see what the demand is and what kind of the state of game comms are by the time we're about to ship.
It's funny too. Before I throw it to Christina, it's there when WoW did it and WoW introduced it. It was right between things, so it was like TeamSpeak and Ventrilo and all of those were around, but they were kind of crappy. The latency wasn't great. Sound quality was bad. Like we were in a real kind of stinky zone, and we weren't to Discord yet. So they kind of came into the middle and said, yeah, this is a needed thing. Let's do it. And then Discord came and just sort of solved the problem. And I mean, I would think that if it's a solved problem, I don't know why you guys would make it a priority. It seems like you wouldn't. But Christina, any thoughts on this as a possibility?
It's a great word to use. So we talked earlier about a pet system. You talked earlier about how complex the genre is and how big it can be. A lot of solving that comes down to just prioritizing things. And so if you asked me, like, where would our team spend its efforts? Is it on building a voice chat or building a pet system? I would definitely pick the pet system, right? Because that could be more unique to Ghost.
Yeah.
Whereas a solved problem, like maybe in some world when we're, like there would be a reason for us to solve voice chat, but right now Discord serves all of that function. And we would rather spend things on in-game features that would make our player experience more fun.
Very important question here. What is your go-to meal in crunch time? I think you should all have to answer this and do it honestly. Greg, when you're in crunch mode, what are you chowing down on?
So to clarify, like we don't crunch in the formal sense of like
No.
asking the team to work extra hours, but
I'm glad you clarified. Thank you for that.
yes. I mean, I think a lot of listeners know that I keep chickens and I get a lot of eggs, and a hard-boiled egg is very nutritious and very quick to eat. So I always keep a ton of hard-boiled eggs around.
That's great. That's perfect. Shanti, what's your go-to?
Bulldog spicy ramen, the carbonara flavor, 2 of them
Oh,
with some bok choy and an egg mixed in.
there's nothing wrong with any of what I just heard. That's fantastic.
It's delicious. I'd highly recommend it.
I would eat that right now if I had it in front of me. Maybe after the show. Christina, what's your go-to?
I'll pivot the question slightly. I learned during playtests, because we had so many in November, that I love a good like snackable candy while we're in the middle of playtest, because so much is going on, but you still want some energy intake, right? So like M&M's, Skittles, anything that's just like you can just keep going. That was perfect for playtest.
Nice. I love it. Greg, if there's our final question from the chat. If there isn't a ghost crab in the game as a pet, I will riot. What do you have to say about that?
So it's interesting because one of the things we're trying to do is figure out what real world creatures should we have in Ghost. A lot of what we're trying to do is say like, well, we don't have elves, but we have something that's elf-like. We may not have alligators, but we'll have something that's kind of alligator-like. And like, should that extend to like seagulls? Like we've joked about having a rat catcher class that implies there are rats in the world. Like, is it weird to not have dogs or horses? So it's a good question of like, are there actual crabs, or could there just be something that's crab-like?
You know, what's never come up on here yet is we haven't asked any questions about mounts. I don't think on the show, have we? Has that ever come up? Are you dreading that question?
I mean, I'll answer it for what we're thinking today, which is traversal is something that's really important to the different biomes. And the different biomes you travel, like in the desert, you'll probably get around in a different way than you would in a forest or a mountain zone. Like in the mountain zone, maybe you're grappling a lot. In the desert, maybe you're riding a giant train or something. So we would rather mounts be something you do in a particular biome rather than I have my gigantic mount collection and I'm always just getting on my mount every time I have to move more than like 5 meters across a map.
I knew it'd be an interesting question. The reason I thought of it is because you said the word horse and I couldn't help it. But also, you know, famously, Greg's the guy that announced to everybody on a live show of mine at a community event after a BlizzCon that you wouldn't be able to fly in Draenor or in Warlords of Draenor until a certain, you know, you'd done certain things. And that was a big deal at the time. People were like losing their minds over that.
I think it's still a big deal, but
yeah.
I mean, but unpacking that a little bit, wow, we felt like we had to add mounts because the world was gigantic, and it's fun maybe to walk when you're level 12, and then at some point you're like, dude, I just want to get from like Ironforge to Loch Modan. I don't want to like have to take 30 minutes of real time. Give me a way to make that go faster. So they, you know, introduce faster and faster ground mounts and faster flying mounts, and everyone just teleport. So we are trying to make traversal within a blue zone fun and engaging and part of the game, not just get me to the next fun part. And then we haven't talked about how you travel from shard to shard yet. That'll be a whole nother podcast, but we'd rather focus traversal on that than to say, hey, travel's the boring part, and give players ways to just kind of skip over it.
Well, I think that's as good as you're going to get at home on the flying or the riding for now. Okay, don't be nervous just because it's Greg and he had that whole like we're not going to let you fly in Draenor thing. All right, don't hold old grudges. Maybe traversal will be the most amazing thing you've ever experienced in a game. In this game, you don't know, so you have to wait and find out.
We already have like gliding and jump pads and stuff like that, so we're on our way to make traversal fun.
Yeah, some people want you to keep those class closets in. I've noticed. Maybe there's some form of, like you said, emergent PvP gameplay that might use class closets at some point. But seeing you guys go into these closets like Clark Kent and come out like Superman is a pretty awesome. It's a nice touch.
It was actually a really clever implementation by one of our engineers early on to avoid, like normally in game dev, you'll open up a console and you'll type class switch 3 and everyone screws it up all the time. So he's like, let's just have a little porta potty. You step in and it changes whatever class, and then no one can ever mess it up.
Yeah, it's a really fun watch. If you go track it down on the video, I'm actually syncing to it right now, but it is a very funny. Here it is. It's a very funny way to think of a game. There's everybody jumping into the healer box. There's the tank box. I absolutely love this as a relic, though. Like, you should have some reference to it in the future. I don't know what it is. It's just me talking, but I like that a lot. Anyway, we've had an amazing show, and as always, much of that is due to who we have on it. Of course, Greg, always good to have you on, but Shanti and Christina, always love having you guys on. Thanks so much for being here.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, it was great having you both. I can't wait to do it again. And Greg, as always, a pleasure, man.
We have so much to talk about. We can keep these podcasts populated for some time.
Yep, I agree. And we're going to keep doing that. Every month you get a new one. And next month, it'll be a brand new year, 2025's first episode. That'll be episode 15. And who knows what we'll talk about. But 2025 is looking real bright for Ghost, in my opinion. And I hope you guys are enjoying it. Big thanks to the chat and everybody who sends in these great questions. Cannot say enough about Faye's good work behind the scenes, making sure these get up front. And just being the backbone of what's going on here every time we do it live. So huge thanks to her and everybody on the team at FPC. That is going to do it for us. Until next month, everybody have a great month, and we'll see you then.
Those pants are made for frogging, if you know what I mean. I actually don't. Frogpants.com.
And scene. Well done, everybody.
Hey.
Fantastic as usual. Fantastic Pixel Castle, you might even say.
It's always tricky when we have 4 of us to like make sure people get a word in edgewise. We're not cutting each other off and stuff. So well done, Scott.
It can be pretty tricky to balance, but I think everybody did great today. And I love this stuff that Faye did in this spreadsheet. This is great. Like really, really great. Like just gives us a really good path to go down. So we'll be talking to her about more of this. It's really awesome. Well, thank you all, and I will see you guys a little bit later. Everybody at home, thanks for watching. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being a part of it. And tell your friends, whatever that means. All right? Well, no, it means tell your friends. I know what it means. Do what you got to do. We'll see you next time.